Hello and welcome to the Bike Show, and an episode that sees us riding an electric bike that seems very tasty indeed. We'll be checking out a new hero dealer in Bloemfontein, and because both Don and I are between test bikes at the moment, I'll be trying to answer some of your questions whilst also bringing you a bit of the latest news from the world of motorcycling. Let us get started with the questions, of which we get a great many, mainly via the comment section of our YouTube channel. Take a look, just search for The Bike Show in YouTube and you'll find us. It's nigh on impossible for us to answer all the comments there, good or bad, and certainly not in any detail, so I'm going to try and answer a few of those that have been popping up the most frequently. And the nature of the social media beast these days is that both Don and I get rather too many personal comments and questions. A lot are very complimentary, believe it or not, though far from all of them are exactly positive, for which we can thank the very busy motorcycling trolls of the world. So I'll try to get a few of the less offensive ones out of the way as quickly and as politely as possible. Which of us is fastest is a common one, and the answer is Don. He's younger, that's my excuse. Though even in my relatively short and not very impressive racing heyday, compared to his more impressive racing peak, I think he might still have had the edge. Despite a lot of the unnecessarily cruel trolling that he gets about his weight in the comments, he is still very rapid, super smooth, has lots of corner speed and uses huge amounts of lean angle. More than necessary really, I think, probably because he's too lazy to hang off very far. We haven't actually ridden together for a few months now, and now that all the COVID travel restrictions seem to have eased, I'm looking forward to getting back to SA and doing some testing with him and Bill, and maybe even one or two of our South African viewers, so more on those opportunities in a future episode. People also ask what skill we'd most like to improve in our riding, and for me that's easy. I'd love to have a dirt bike and improve my extremely poor off-road abilities. At one stage a few years ago, I should really just have saved everybody some time and thrown every adventure bike that came my way straight into a skip and gone off to hospital to have a fresh piece of metal screwed onto a bone. Don, well, annoyingly, he's quite handy whatever type of bike you give him, but I know there's one skill he's never got around to mastering, and he could if he just practiced a bit, and that's wheelies. He can manage a little power wheelie, but getting it up to balance point and changing gears is what he'd really like to do. I know, it's a pointless and childish skill to have, but after 25 years plus of hoiking wheelies, I still haven't got bored of it. Just be warned, although it's a relatively simple, if slightly scary trick to learn, the consequences of getting it wrong can be very painful and extremely expensive because your bike often ends up upside down. So say goodbye to your clocks and tank, seat unit, bars, switchgear. The bill will probably be enormous even for a very slow mistake. Want to find out more? There's a how-to video on our YouTube channel. And the final personal one we see most often is about which bike we'd have if we were limited to just the one. We both love big V-twins, the biking equivalent of a V8 in a car, and we both own V8 cars. In fact, Don still has one. And we both have a thing for naked sport bikes. Don would take KTM's 1290 Super Ducar, and on some days so would I, but ultimately I think I would be happiest with Aprilia's sublime V4 Tuono. Now that's out of the way, another frequent topic to prompt a lot of questions recently has been the neo-retro type of bike, with people wondering if they're just a passing fad, a pointless reskin of existing bikes, and simply show a lack of imagination regarding designing new models. Okay, so by neo-retro what we're talking about is bikes, of which at the moment there's probably only 2 or 3 that spring to mind, whose styling is obviously influenced by bikes from the past but has sort of been reinterpreted in a modern way. That sounded a bit like marketing gobbledygook, didn't it? If you walk past one of these bikes, the 2 most obvious would be MV Agusta Super Veloci and Triumph's new Speed Triple RR, both of which Don has ridden, by the way. You'll probably think, wow, that's interesting looking, beautiful even, and it will remind you in places of something you may have seen previously. But it's not like walking past a full-on retro model, of which every manufacturer has at least a couple, and Triumph has tons, where you could almost think that it was an amazingly well-preserved bike from the 1970s or 80s. because it is designed to almost exactly mimic its equivalent from an earlier time period. Those retro models are effectively modern copies of previous models and styles. The two neo-retro models, and neo is just a poncy way of saying new, interpret some of those earlier styling cues and then incorporate them into a fresher, more contemporary look. Sort of paying homage to the past, but not copying it directly. So really, it does take imagination and design skills to make the look work as a whole, and as to whether it's a passing fad, perhaps. It's certainly niche, but I think we'll see more of this type of thing in the future. And personally, even though I grew up and got into bikes in the late 1970s and 1980s, I would much prefer one of these designs than a straight up retro model. And on this styling note, a new model has just been unveiled in Japan that is, I suppose, of a similar vein, but will be more affordable than either the Italian or British bikes we've been talking about. The Honda Hawk 11 follows on, at least in terms of the styling, from Honda's very lovely four-cylinder naked CB1000R and 650R that are described by the Japanese manufacturer as Neo Sports Cafe, I think it is. Neither, unfortunately, currently available in South Africa, although the guts of this new Hawk come from the Africa Twin. You get the frame and engine from that bike, so in the region of 100 horsepower from the 1084cc parallel twin. These same ingredients have already been used to make the touring NT1100 that was released towards the end of last year, remember. So in that vein, the swing arm for this Hawk comes from that touring model, along with the road-size wheels. It's not quite the looker of either the Speed Triple RR or Super Veloci, but I have to say, I quite like what I'm seeing and I'm glad they've made it. Given the cost of designing and building new models these days, it's inevitable that all manufacturers are going to use the same base ingredients to make multiple types of bike, and rather that scenario than being offered a more limited range of models. Staying with the latest models, but turning the performance dial all the way up to 11, there's a lot of mumbling and grumbling in the comments these days about whether the modern sport bike has any relevance at all anymore. What we're talking about here are the latest super bikes, and these days also the latest top-of-the-range naked sport bikes, which I've occasionally referred to as hyper-nakeds because they've moved naked sport bikes onto a level where they're essentially every bit as powerful and single-mindedly focused on outright performance as their superbike cousins. 200 plus horsepower in packages that often weigh less than 200 kilos means the mythical 1 horsepower to 1 kilogram power to weight ratio of my youth that was back then achievable only by forced induction drag bikes or the most exotic Grand Prix machines is now available to the man in the street for use on the street. It is frankly outrageous and largely unusable performance, silly, probably downright dangerous for any rider who isn't seriously experienced, and generally cannot be justified in any kind of coldly logical, rational way. In some cases, we're talking about bikes that would be nigh on unrideable by an average rider on an average road in anything less than perfect weather conditions, were it not for the help offered by some mind-blowingly complex and capable electronic rider aids. And so no, they're not ultimately that relevant for road riding, and I also make no bones about being often intimidated, frequently terrified, and on occasion simply overwhelmed by the speed with which things can and do happen on public roads when you're in the mood to use the full range of the throttle on one of these things. But I am so very grateful that the manufacturers keep bringing us the very best that they can do, that they so rapidly transfer the lessons learned racing at the highest levels into technology that offers us this crazy performance, along with the technology to control it and use it safely. Ducati's MotoGP riders, while training on Panigale V4s, have lapped within about 3 seconds, I think it is, of their best times on the priceless prototypes that they race on a Sunday. That you can buy one of these machines with lights and mirrors and a number plate and take it on the road is, well, it's bonkers, isn't it? I rode Ducati's 208 horsepower naked V4 Street Fighter at the end of last year on some stupidly tight and twisty Apennine roads in Italy, and rarely got out of second and third gears. But those few fleeting, synapse-frying moments where I could experience the combination of full throttle and high RPM were just unforgettable. If you have a bike like that and only get to savour those occasions once a week or even once a month, it's still worth it. On top of which, technological marvels that these machines now are, that same mind-bending performance weapon will happily transport you at much more sane and legal speeds, in comfort, reliably and safely, while you wait to build up the courage to visit the dark side again. So yes, ultimately they are still relevant, and come the revolution, should any do-gooding prescriptive bureaucrat think it necessary to regulate or limit their availability. Just a quick extra thought to show how far we've come in the last couple of decades, in the time I've been doing this job. The Ducati Multistrada V2 that I rode at the launch last year, a bike that is effectively their friendliest, least threatening touring model, an entry-level Multistrada if you like, has the same, or even very slightly better, power and weight figures as the original 916, that when I first rode it made me glad to be living in a time where such ridiculous performance was available for mere mortals like me to ride on the road. And after the Street Fighter V4 experience, last month I got a quick blast on the new V2 Street Fighter in Spain. Unfortunately I couldn't film it, but I will get back to Bologna to do so in the next couple of months. But I loved it. It's the friendlier, less threatening Street Fighter with only, I can't remember exactly, 152 horsepower or something. Only. Wind that thing up though, and down a lovely snaking back road, it is still monstrously fast, really scarily quick. And no wonder really, it has comparable performance stats to the race bikes on which a certain Carl Fogarty was winning World Superbike Championships. And now you can have that same performance with incredible electronic rider aids that Foggy couldn't even begin to imagine back then, in a naked bike that is also a breeze to ride down to the shops for some bread and milk on a cold, wet winter morning. Amazing, isn't it, really? There's a lot to talk about the likes of Hero, Bajaj and Royal Enfield out of India, and QJ Motors, Lonson, Zongshen and any number of others out of China, and whether they are now making bikes that are up to international quality standards. From both countries, I'd say yes. The quality and performance is beginning to approach the levels we see from the other major manufacturers in the respective price range. Most of the Japanese, European and American bike companies are now partnered in one way or another with a counterpart in India or China, or perhaps even both. And the news of China's own new models just keeps coming, and they are thankfully beginning to look genuinely new rather than being some shameful, shoddy rip-off of something already made elsewhere. These two new 700 sport bikes from QJ Motors are the latest example, though many viewers may better know their products as Benellis, since that is what they are rebadged as in many parts of the world. Some of the companies have even begun to rebrand and rename even in an effort to shake off their previously unfashionable reputations with a funky and decidedly more Western name. Check these two new 400s, one a sporty model, the other a lightweight adventure bike. Both look good, both will surely offer great value for money, but they are being sold as Cyclones rather than Zongshens, which is the factory that actually makes them. I would just say that I think the future for the Chinese products may be on shakier ground than those from India. Why? Well, think about Ukraine. If Russia had a big motorcycle manufacturer, do you think its sales would now be being affected? Of course. Would you want to support the Russian economy at a time like this? Well, China has been a lot more strident and public with its intention to take Taiwan back into its communist fold, with the use of military force if needed. And there is also, I feel, bubbling just below the surface, a tsunami of bad feeling that will, in the relatively near future, especially after the awakening and mobilization of public opinion around the war in Ukraine, rise to the surface and prompt much more scrutiny and disapproval, and quite probably even sanctions to put pressure on the alleged genocide of the Uyghur minority in Western China, and numerous other human rights abuses and the crushing of the free press across China and Hong Kong. As a journalist myself, in the very loosest possible sense of the term, I am all too aware of the similarities between Russia and China, where journalists end up in prison for speaking truth to power, or they disappear, or accidentally fall out of windows in police stations or hospitals or shopping malls. What sanctions might mean for China's expanding motorcycle industry, its ability to market and sell its bikes and provide spares and backup in the future, I don't know, but it's definitely going to be a factor in the coming years. And not just for the Chinese themselves, but all those major manufacturers from BMW to KTM and all points in between who have invested in shared manufacturing operations inside China. The pressure is slowly going to grow on them to comment on this difficult issue that they, and us, seem to be ignoring in favour of more affordable bikes, bigger profits and access to the holy grail of markets, which is of course 1.4 billion Chinese consumers. Time for an ad break.